Welcome to the Cash Car Convert Podcast, Episode 22.
You're listening to the Cash Car Convert Podcast with James Kinson.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Cash Car Convert Podcast. My name is James Kinson and I am the Cash Car Convert. This is the podcast where cash cars are cool and auto debt is dangerous to your financial future. On today's show, I've got a person that I admire a lot. I think of him as a real Renaissance man. He seems to have dabbled in so many things, and I wonder, how he's really had time to do all these things. So he's been a master mechanic. He owns a State Farm agency. He's a certified financial planner. He's a college professor at the Bauer College of Business at the University of Houston. He hosts multiple podcasts. He's a public speaker. He's an author of multiple books. And let me just say, having met him on a few occasions, just a regular all-around nice guy to boot. And with that, I'd like to welcome Jim Munchbach to my show.
Wow. Who were you just talking about?
You got quite the resume there, Jim.
You said dabbling, and that's how I feel sometimes. I am a master dabbler.
Okay.
Dabbling is fun for me, so who knows what I'll be dabbling in next.
I believe that. Yeah, I was looking at all the things you had done, and, when we met, and even when I was on your show, the Social Business Authority, I didn't realize you were an author until I heard you on Jared's show, so it was an eye-opener for me to go back and go, wow, okay, I knew he did a lot of things, but gosh, I didn't know he'd written some books too, so that was really wild, so congratulations on that. That's quite an accomplishment.
Well, thank you. If I were going to write a book today, I would write a book about either cars or motorcycles.
Nice. Well, I'm definitely going to be writing one about cars myself, so hopefully I'll get that thing cranked out this year sometime, but got a ways to go with that.
I can't wait to read it. It'll make a great podcast series, too.
Oh, absolutely right. Absolutely right. Well, Jim, this show is dedicated to cash cars and how people acquire their cars and so forth. So I always like to ask my guests how they got their first car and how it worked out for them. So can you take us back in time to your first vehicle and how that worked out?
Oh, man, that just gave me a rush. My first car was a 1968. It was a Plymouth station wagon Fury 2.
Wow.
It had a 383. I think it was a 2-barrel carburetor, but it ran like a clock. It was a great vehicle. My dad had owned it, and he wanted to help me get a vehicle, and I told him I would be happy to pay what he paid for the car because he got the car for $150.
Wow.
And my dad was a real dealer with cars. People would sell him used cars, and he would fix them up, and he was a mechanic. So anyway, he sold me that green station wagon. It was like lime green, not lime like bright lime, but it was an ugly green, and it had, the wood panel contact paper basically.
Yep.
And then chrome around it, and I stripped all of that off. And then I painted that car black with yellow stripes, like Starsky and Hutch. Yeah, and I put big wide Kraggers on the back and, chrome wheels on the front. I put chrome side pipes down the side, jacked it up with air shocks, and that was my car.
Wow,
and
nice.
Everybody knew when I came with a 4-door station wagon, it was the most ridiculous vehicle you could ever imagine.
I want to see a photo of that car if you have one at some point. That's fantastic.
Photos. Thank goodness none exist.
It's just the legend of the Plymouth Fury. So there we go.
I got out of that. That was in Lansing, Michigan, and I left that town when I was 16 years old, and I have never gone back there to live. I only go to visit, and I never tell anybody when I'm coming to town because I'm afraid they might remember me as the guy who drove that station wagon.
That's great. That's a great story. I love that, and I love all the work you did to it as well. Right? I mean, that's great. But hey, you got a deal on it. That was definitely a good price.
And it was a great vehicle. I'll never forget. I worked at a Shell station, and one day in the summer, about a month before I left home to go to Denver Automotive and Diesel College, a guy pulled out in front of me, and I hit him, and it just wrecked the front of the car, but it was still drivable. And a month later, I drove that station wagon from Lansing, Michigan to Denver, Colorado, pulling a motorcycle on a trailer. And I was just barely 17. I just turned 17, and that was my kind of transition to adulthood.
So so that's part of your story that I wanted to kind of touch on a bit is how did you come to be a master mechanic? And obviously you mentioned earlier in the story here that your dad was a mechanic and did a lot with cars. So it sounds like it was just a natural thing for you to go into that. But you didn't just go to work for somebody and start learning it. It sounds like you went off to a school in Denver there to get your training.
Well, I did both. I worked at a Shell station, doing very minor mechanical work. And this guy, his name was Rick Lowry. He taught me how to work on cars a little bit. And the owner of the gas station had a dealership. It was a Corvette dealership. Excuse me. And he told me if I went to school and became certified as a master mechanic, he would give me a job when I got back from Denver. So as a high school kid, I got permission to go away and study automotive and got certified. I passed all of the tests. And then I came back, and this fellow who promised me the job gave me a job. And the very first day, he handed me a work order to go check out a 1974 Corvette, and it needed a battery check. So I went, and I couldn't figure out where the battery was.
Oh.
So I went back to him, and I'm like, I can't find the battery. And he looked at me, and it was one of those earliest times in my life when I heard the F-bomb. And he told me if I couldn't find the battery, he couldn't use me, and he terminated me on the spot.
Wow.
So I worked for all of 30 minutes as an auto mechanic who was a master mechanic, but really kind of clueless. I had a ton of book knowledge, but, that's very different than really going out there and having the experience of a real master mechanic. So that was a wake-up call.
That also brings up something else for me because I used to work as a painter, and I know a lot of people in that industry don't have a lot of patience for people who don't know what they're doing immediately. And so from that experience, have you ever found that you give people more grace just based on having had that happen to you, or do you think that was a good learning experience for you, and therefore do you give people some tough love sometimes?
That's a great question. I would say the latter. I wish I were more graceful and kind, and I am sometimes. I try to be. I want to be. But the truth is, especially as a professor, I feel like if I can help the students understand that they are responsible and that nobody's going to win the game for them other than them, they have to do the work. So I'd say the tough love is much more my approach. In fact, a good friend of mine told me not long ago that I had the gift of confrontation, which is true.
Okay. Wow. I got to say, obviously we've only interacted through social media and through, some social events. So I haven't seen that side of you. So that's very interesting. But I can certainly see as a professor, students are coming to you with all kinds of issues, and you do have to, make sure you're taking the right line and thinking not just about them in the moment, but thinking about them going forward. And I think that's a really good way to look at a lot of things in life. I think we introspectively ought to be doing that a lot more in our own lives, and we don't. We go for the immediate, quick fix or the thing that feels good in the moment, and not the thing that's going to be good over the long haul. So I admire that view.
Well, excuse me. I appreciate that, James. One thing I've been very surprised by is that people like me. And so sometimes I'm a little, I'll say something like that you know Derek Halpern, right?
Yes, I do.
I think Derek and I have a lot in common, just kind of outspoken, and I like Derek a lot. I think he's pretty cool. But I try to be nicer than what I perceive Derek might be sometimes. So but I like him, and I think I basically have his personality. And as a younger man, I was a lot more like him. And now I'm older, and I do have more grace. I have grown children, and my family has been through kind of the ringer with addictions and just challenges that really reshape who you are. And so I've been reshaped in that way, and I'm thankful for that. I'm a much kinder person than I might communicate that I am sometimes, I think.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I think you're spot on about Derek. I think he's the kind of guy that you better not ask him a question unless you really want to know what the answer is, because he's going to tell you exactly how he thinks it is, and there's something to be said for that. But everybody's different and everybody responds differently, and I think having grown now and maybe mellowed a bit with age, you can now come with the right tool for the job, so to speak, right? If you need to have that soft handle, you can. If you need to be tough, you can do that as well. And
with age comes some wisdom. I think when I was Derek's age, I thought everybody in the world was just like me because I didn't realize how different people were. And now as I'm older, I realize that I'm they say that people with A-type, certain personalities, there's a smaller percentage of us running around, and anyway, so I'm learning as I'm growing older and appreciating that people are different and they have a different perspective, a different approach to life. And so I want to use whatever God has given me to help other people get through this challenging thing we call life.
Great. Well, listen, I want to transition now because, a lot of people probably out there are wondering, okay, this guy was a master mechanic and he has that background and I get that, but how did he get into all of these other things? So can you tell us how you went from being a master mechanic to, owning your own agency and being a certified financial planner and a college professor and an author and a speaker and, all of those things that transpired? It doesn't seem, I can't see a straight path from one to the other. So how did that work?
Yes, some of us just don't like to draw inside the lines. And when I was in high school, I left high school on my own to become a mechanic because I knew that my dad was very clear. When you turn 18, you're on your own. And I appreciate that today. So I became independent very early in my life. And then while I was earning a living as a master mechanic, I met a man, Vance Miller, who worked for State Farm, and I shared some of that story on Jared's podcast, Starve the Doubts. But I became employed at State Farm as an adjuster and discovered that I was pretty good at the job. And then I got promoted several times, and then I was offered an opportunity to become a State Farm agent, which is a really great way to make a living. But while I've been a State Farm agent in Houston, we've had a lot of restrictions in our market here. We're coastal and I can't grow my business the way I hoped I would grow my business. So I started to look at other things. One of them was I was interested in financial planning. So I invested a lot of time and money and energy becoming a certified financial planner. Once I did that, I kind of discovered a different view of money. And I wanted to write a book that kind of outlined how I took people through the process of financial coaching and financial planning. So that was my first book. It was just a result of having learned so much that I was so thankful to have learned from so many people who taught me so much. And I spent thousands and thousands of dollars in training and equipping myself so that I could manage people's money in a way that I felt confident to do that. And so when I became a certified financial planner, I felt like I had unlocked a code that I'd been searching for a long time. So I wrote a book. That book was to professionals. It's called What Matters Most: Building a Purpose-Centered Alliance with Your Clients to Fulfill Their Dreams and Yours Too. That book was for professionals. And I always knew I wanted to write a book for consumers. So I wrote a book that basically addressed the same process, but it was written to a different audience, to regular people. And that book is Make Your Money Count: Connecting Your Resources to What Matters Most. So that was my book writing career. And that second book, Make Your Money Count, was never really intended to be, a bestseller. It was intended to be a gift to the people that I worked with who hired me as their financial planner, and also for the thousands of people who have trusted me with their State Farm insurance. So that's the books were just a result of having experienced something that I wanted to share. And the rest of it is the podcasting was a result of trying to figure out how could I do more coaching. And with new media and podcasting in particular, I met Cliff Ravenscraft, and he convinced me that this was an easy way to tell your story and build your brand. It turned out that was some of the best advice I've ever gotten in any business, because it's fun, it's cheap, it's easy, and you can make a big difference. Your show, I mean, just when we did our podcast together, you and I, on how to buy a used car, I got 10 times more activity, comments from that episode than any episode I've ever done. And the students were just so thankful for that practical, helpful information about how to buy a car. I was blown away by that. But that's just an example, James, of what I think podcasting is. And I'm not good at marketing, or I'm not really serious about building my brand online. I'm just having fun.
Well, you are having fun, but you're helping tons of people as well. And that's kind of the beauty of it. There's, you were nice enough to share the link with me, and I was able to see the comments that had come from the students, and I was blown away by that. That's as much engagement as I had ever seen on anything that I had done online as well. So it was quite humbling to see that, and I was very thankful that you gave me the opportunity to be on your show and to touch some of these young adults' lives.
Yeah, let's not call them children. They'll be mad at me. Some of them are, they're amazing people, and it's such a gift to me as what, someone just walked in my back door. Just a second.
All right.
Go around to the front, please. I'm in my studio, which is in the back of my State Farm office, and every once in a while somebody comes right in the back door. It's not really an entryway, but sorry about that.
No, that's all good. That's what editing is for, right? So,
edit anything either. One thing Cliff taught me is, raw is pretty good in the podcast media. And I know, this is your show, but that's one thing I've enjoyed, is just the freedom to let your listener know somebody just walked in my back door. Right.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I try not to over edit, but I try to edit some and to clean up some things that I do, especially when I'm doing monologues. It seems that I need to do more editing. It seems like the interviews tend to go more smoothly, and I don't have as much issue there. So I don't know if you sounds like you don't edit, period. So I guess it doesn't matter if you're doing anything.
Well, sometimes I do, and especially like you said, if I'm doing monologue, then I just feel real clumsy, and so I feel like I have to edit it, and it's a lot more work. So I love doing interviews like this, because this is the way we do life.
That's absolutely right. And that, you're right. I before I started my podcast, I too met Cliff and had a conversation with him about starting my podcast. I guess the difference is I knew I wanted to do one, but he told me much the same thing. He said, get started. Doesn't matter what kind of equipment you have. Just get going and get it out there, and just let people know you were so passionate about what you wanted to get out there that, you just wanted to get the message out. And so I always appreciated that. And I probably still took a little bit too long to get mine started, but I just wanted to have more experience behind me before I got rolling out there. And I didn't want to turn people off to my show because of the way I spoke or the way it was, the way I had run the show. I feel like I've got an important message, and I want to be cognizant of how I come across to people. So,
well, you do have a very important message. I mean, I tell my students that, transportation, cars, you're going to spend a lot of money in your life on cars. So, if I can teach you to save a significant amount of money in that one purchase, then I can help you achieve your goal of becoming a millionaire by the time you're 50 with a lot less stress and a lot less effort.
Well, that is so true. And I'll tell you, growing up myself, I wish, I don't know, I struggle because I'm not sure I was ready for the message then, but I wish I'd had the opportunity to hear it. And to have the opportunity to make those choices based on more insight and more education than I had about the way finance works and all those kinds of things. So,
well, one thing I want to just say, James, is when you were in college and when I was in college, we did not have this resource available to us.
So true.
There was not, the internet wasn't a resource, and certainly podcasting was not a resource. And that's one thing that I am really passionate about is no matter what it is that you do to take value to the marketplace, a podcast is it's the most efficient, effective way to get your story out there.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I didn't mean for this to turn into a podcast episode, but in the sense that we're going to talk about podcasts. But, I just talked about that very subject at my Toastmasters meeting last week. And it's because I feel so strongly about what this medium can do for people. And, if you've got a small business, if you're any kind of an author or a speaker, and you want to build a platform of some sort, I think this is the quickest way to do it. And it's for all the reasons that Cliff lists, that you're in people's ears. The market isn't saturated yet, even though there are 225,000 podcasts. Still only about a third of the population have ever actually listened to a podcast. So there's so much growth potential for it. And I'm with you 100% there.
Cool. You want to talk about master mechanics and finding a mechanic?
I do indeed. I wanted, we had such a good conversation on your show, and I had so much good feedback, again, not only from your students, but, people, my wife listened to it and she thought it was a great episode. And I talked to her about, I wanted to bring you on to talk about how to find a good mechanic because, again, I'm a lay person in the auto industry. I know what I know, but there's things I don't know. And, I've had a good run with mechanics because my brother-in-law is a mechanic, and I've been able to utilize that resource and know that I can trust him to do the right thing for me and by me. But there's a lot of people out there who I think steer themselves away from cash vehicles or cars that are less expensive because they're concerned about getting ripped off by a mechanic and some of those kinds of things. And maybe especially some of the female listeners might feel that way. So I thought it would really be helpful to bring somebody on like yourself who has experience as a mechanic and may be able to guide them with a few key points about what to look for in a good mechanic and maybe even more important, what to look for in a bad mechanic and what to know to run away from.
Well, I'll tell you, James, the first thing that came to mind when you invited me to be on your show, and I appreciate the invitation too. All those kind words are very generous. But the one thing that seems to me to be the most important in terms of finding a good mechanic is it someone that you can trust? And that's always true in any relationship. But in the mechanical world, in the world of mechanics, it's kind of hard to know. So here's what I would say. If you're a person who's trying to find a mechanic and you're not sure where to go, I would start with friends and family, and I would ask them who they use. With social media now, we have so much access to get that kind of personal information from each other, from one another, from our own experience. And we love to share our experience. We love to tell the story about someone who's helped us and someone who's earned our trust. And when it comes to an auto mechanic, they're not typically, posting on Facebook. At least I don't know any mechanics that have any kind of online presence, but your friends do, your family does, and there's no better way. The people that I go to today, because I don't like to work on my own car too much. I still change my own oil and my own wiper blades, and sometimes I'll put belts on or a water pump. It just depends. But most of the time, because I'm so busy and frankly I can afford to pay a mechanic, I go to Mustang Auto in Friendswood. And the way that I discovered the folks at Mustang Auto, who I would trust, I trust them completely. And, I don't get a second opinion. They've proven that they're worthy of trust. And I got their name from my friend Patrick Springle, who helped me write the books that I wrote. His office is right down, like 4 doors down from theirs. And that is hands down the best way to find a mechanic.
Okay. And I appreciate that. And I think that is a good way. Obviously that's the way I found my mechanic in a sense. I mean, my brother's brother-in-law opened up this shop and so I got, before I even went to him, I had some good reviews from some people who had gone and had some work done there, and being, family, that helps as well. So now I'm going to back up and say, okay, let's say that the person says, I don't know anybody who knows a mechanic. All my friends, they take their cars to a dealership and, dealerships are expensive, and I don't know that I want to do that, even though I think I might be able to trust them. What other ways do you have out there to kind of find a mechanic that you can think of?
Well, another way I would go about it is, because I'm a State Farm agent, State Farm agents are resources in the community because we work with so many different people. For instance, we have probably a dozen shops that my agency works with directly or indirectly. The claims department works with them directly. And so because of that, they have to have certain credentials and certain qualifications to be in a relationship like they are with State Farm. And so, your State Farm agent or other professionals who you work with are really good resources for finding qualified mechanics. They're licensed. That's another thing I would say. I became a certified master mechanic, and that required a lot of training. And even though I told the story about how I was still a little bit clueless, having those credentials demonstrates that somebody is committed to quality and training. And so that's another thing. I wouldn't go to a mechanic that was not officially, certified, especially if you're trying to get work done on a vehicle that is more modern and has unless you're dealing with a very old car, everything is electronic, and it needs to be tested, diagnosed with pretty current tools of technology, which requires some training. So I would look for someone who has done the homework to achieve the credentials to be a certified mechanic.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that as well. I think in the past, maybe when you and I were younger, you would hear the term shade tree mechanic, and you really can't do that very much these days with all the electronics and the computers that are built into the vehicles. So, I think you're right. Getting certifications, going to a place where they have the right diagnostic tools and those kinds of things is kind of a minimum entry into the game.
And one thing I would point out, this is maybe not the best way to find a mechanic, but it's one of the things I would encourage people to avoid, and that is when you look at a shop like, I hate to use names, but I'm going to use the name Brake Check because I have personal experience in a lot of it in the arena of brake, I've been a brake specialist for many years, and I know how brakes work, and I know how shops like to sell brakes because there's such a fear factor. And this company, Brake Check, hires young people who have no experience. Now, I haven't checked like last month to see if that's still true. Hopefully it's not. But I've worked in the industry long enough to know where people get their training, and it's kind of like, everybody has to start somewhere. Everybody has to get your experience somewhere. And the problem is when you take your car to a place like that, you expect that they're going to be specialists because that's what they do. But that's not the case. They hire at a low cost, and they usually pay some kind of commission. And there is another big ticket item that I would encourage people to know about their shop. Most mechanics get paid based on some kind of commission, which is not a bad thing. It's just the way it is. But if you go to a shop like a Brake Check and they're getting paid commission and they're telling you need brakes front and rear and new rotors all the way around, and you need new calipers, and the labor and the parts together $1,100, and you really need it because if you drive your car the way it is, it's going to be dangerous. That's how they do it, or that's how they used to do it. And that's the worst way to end up finding a mechanic, is when, all of a sudden something's desperately wrong with your car and it's making this terrible grinding noise, and you think it's, ready to explode, and you take it to a shop that's got this big sign that says, "We can fix anybody's brakes at the best price on the planet." That's not the way to find a mechanic.
Yeah, and it's funny you should say that it was a brake shop, because I can't remember the name of the company, but many years ago, I had a similar experience at a brake specialty shop, and they would lure you in with this low cost entry, and then immediately start upselling you into well, your car needs the premium pads, and your car needs all these specialty items, and like you said, you need to replace the rotors and the calipers and all those components, and most people, their heads just start swimming, and like you said, brakes are such a fear factor for people. They know that they need them to work well. So yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, I do get my oil changed at a specialty type shop, but other than that, I would probably recommend that people find a mechanic that they can take their car to for all the things that they need repairs on, whether it's brakes or a water pump or power steering pump or whatever it might be, rather than trying to go to these specialty shops and pick these one-off locations.
Absolutely. And if you understand kind of how it works for the mechanic, you would want to do that. And here's why. If you're a general mechanic, someone that can be trusted to fix pretty much anything on the car, there's always exceptions, but the basic things that are going to constantly need to be repaired, like brakes. If you're that mechanic and your customer who trusts you doesn't think of you when they need a brake job and they go to another place because it's a specialized brake shop, what you're doing is you're taking away really what we call gravy from the general mechanic, because the brake job, its billable hours are pretty good. And so in terms of all the jobs you could do on a car, a brake job is typically one that a mechanic would be thankful for, because he's getting paid some kind of commission. And I made a lot of money doing brake jobs. In fact, to this day, if any of my cars need brakes, or if any of my friends have need brakes, it's like, let's pull it in the driveway. I have a floor jack it up. I have a compressor, impact wrenches, all my tools, and I can do a brake job, a four-wheel brake job on most cars in about an hour. And so it can be done at a low cost, and if you know what you're doing, you don't have to replace every moving part on the vehicle to do it.
Right. Yeah, I was forced to do some of my own mechanic work when I was younger and didn't have as much money, and I made some mistakes doing brake jobs where it would take me quite a while to get it done. I did replace my own brakes on my Ford F-150, and that was pretty straightforward. It wasn't too bad. I didn't do it in an hour, that's for sure, but I did get it done, and it did save me quite a bit of money doing it that way. So while I'm not encouraging people who don't have mechanical backgrounds to go off and do their own brakes or anything, Jim's right. It's one of those jobs where somebody who knows what they're doing around a car can do quite easily, and so it's a good thing if you're taking your car to a mechanic that you trust and you want to continue that relationship with them. That's a really good thing to take to them and allow them to help you out with.
And I think, just to add on that, James, excuse me, in any relationship where you're doing business with someone, the more business you do with them, the more likely it is they're going to treat you like just a great customer. And that always it's a two-way street, for any relationship. But in a situation where you have multiple cars and they need multiple things, it's just good once you've established a relationship of trust with a mechanic to keep them as busy as they want to be, because that's how they support their family.
Yep, absolutely right. Well, I referenced in some earlier blog posts that I wrote, and when I had Ron Montoya on from Edmunds, and he was in episode 3 of the Cash Car Convert podcast, he actually wrote an article called "How to Find a Good Mechanic," and he talks about some of the things that you do, about using friends and family as a word of mouth way, but he also takes it a little further, talking about using resources like Yelp and Angie's List and message boards and some of those kinds of things. So in a way, it's still all word of mouth, and I'll link to that article in the show notes for people who want to take a look at that, and that'll be at cashcarconvert/022. and cashcarconvert.com/022. So I'll get that out there in the show notes. But that kind of builds on what you're talking about, that really, word of mouth and referral and that kind of thing is really, that's the way mechanics build their business, and that's a good way to find a mechanic as well.
Absolutely. I haven't had a whole lot of success with Angie's List, and I haven't even used Yelp, so I'm not at all familiar with that. Craigslist, well, I haven't. I've hired people on Craigslist, but I haven't, really. I don't guess we use that for contractors or mechanics. So I'd be very interested to start just kind of doing a little research once you post that article, and you bring up some things I haven't thought about. Finding a mechanic online. I would think that the reviews are going to be key if you can find the right place to get the reviews.
Exactly right. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that is going to be key. And I think the other thing we have to be mindful of in those kinds of situations is that people are much more likely to write a review when they've had a bad experience than when they've had a good experience.
Yeah.
I know that's true of me.
Well, and it is of me too. And we should encourage one another and everyone who's listening, especially knowing that we use these resources. Just like, I don't know about you, but I buy a lot of stuff on Amazon, and I don't put as many reviews as I need to, but I am so grateful to the people who do.
I agree 100%, and I'm exactly guilty of that. I've definitely taken advantage of those reviews on multiple occasions, and my wife even more than I do. She's always scouring those reviews for different things, and I get those notes from Amazon saying, hey, would you write a review on this? And I think, oh yeah, I'll do that. And then the next thing you know, I haven't done it, and time has passed, and I'm on to something else.
Writing a review on a product is very helpful, but I think if it's a person who you trust, who's providing something of value to you in a way that made a difference, it's even more important that we take the time and write the review or post it on our Facebook or whatever it is we would do. But especially with a mechanic, I just know, having been a mechanic back in the day, even back then, referrals were what built my business, and that's what paid for me to provide for my family. So referrals and good words, word of mouth is so important.
That's great. Well, so I'm going to ask the listeners then, as you go through and find good mechanics, come back to the show notes page for this episode and post on there and let me know if you used, friends and family to locate a good mechanic, or other referral methodologies, whether it was Yelp or Google or Angie's List or Craigslist or something else, and how it worked out for you. And I think the other thing I'm going to say, and I know, Jim, we're running up on time here, is that I think it's really important to take your car to a mechanic that you want to use before you need to. Take it there and have them, check it out. I think a lot of us, we spend the money on our vehicles and we change the oil and then we drive them, and we don't do enough of the other preventative things. And so then we start thinking, gosh, my car is getting worn out, and you don't really have a basis for thinking that way. Go to your mechanic and let them just give it a good once over and make sure that the belts are all good, and the battery's looking good, and all the fluid levels are right, and you're not having any potential issues with anything that they can see or check out on their machines. And that may cost you a little bit, but I think the peace of mind will be worth it, and you can just kind of check and see what how that mechanic works. And so I think that's a really good idea. I know I've had a couple of people recently that I've spoken to who felt like their cars were on their last legs, and then when they took them into a mechanic and had them checked out, it turned out that the mechanics were like, "Hey, this is a great vehicle. If you want to sell it, I'll buy it," kind of a thing, right? And so I would encourage people to do that. Jim, I don't know, the preemptive strike kind of thing. What's your view on that?
Absolutely. In fact, I was thinking as you were talking, James, that sometimes I take my car to get the oil changed at a quick car or Jiffy Lube or whatever. And I was just thinking, if you have a mechanic, and I don't do this, but I'm thinking I should, it makes sense, especially if you're not mechanically inclined and you're not able to really keep an eye on what might need to be done on your vehicle. It'd be a pretty good idea to let your mechanic change the oil on regular intervals so that they can give it a once over from bumper to bumper and see if there's anything about to fall off or anything they might do to prevent you from having extraordinary cost of repairs. For example, you mentioned, fluid levels. There's a lot that you can diagnose from a vehicle based on the fluids in the transmission and the oil and the radiator and the brake fluid. So a mechanic who knows your car and gives it a little attention could be a very, very valuable resource if they get to look at your car on a regular basis.
Yep, that's a great point. And as they become familiar with your car, if there's all of a sudden a leak where there wasn't one last month or something, then they're going to be able to catch that and again save you a lot of money and a lot of hassle. And it's not that everything's going to be cheap. I mean, sometimes mechanics are going to find things that cost a bit to repair, and you have to make some financial trade-off kinds of decisions, and you may need to save some money before you do something. But if you have a mechanic you can trust, they'll also have a conversation with you about how critical it is you do it now. And if over time, every time your mechanic finds something, they tell you that it's always got to be done immediately, I would start to get a little concerned about that. It may be that that's just luck, and that they're actually accurate about that. But if it was always an emergency, I would be concerned that maybe I wasn't getting the full story.
No doubt. And one of the things I would encourage people to do is mechanical parts that are worn out typically are visible. You can look at them, and a good mechanic can show you why this needs to be done. And even if you don't have a clue, if you just look at it, sometimes the mechanical visible part it will tell the story, especially something like brakes, because if a good mechanic points out the thickness of the pad compared to a new pad, that's what I always did. I'd say, look, this is the pads that you have on your disc brakes right now. See how thick they are? See this right here? And it's like about as thick as a quarter. And this new brake pad is about as thick as a pancake or a waffle. I mean, it's a big difference. And that's once that wears out, it's going to be a metal to metal rivet, and it's going to wear out your rotor. So this isn't something you want to put off. This is, it's a thickness of a quarter. You need to get this done. And if it's half as thick as the new pads, then, you don't need to do it right away, but let's keep an eye on it.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I've certainly been guilty of running mine down to where I heard the metal scraping. So I know that awful sound when you hit the brakes.
And if you're a mechanic, you don't worry about it. You wait until that happens and then you fix it. But it doesn't take very long, as you well know, once you start hearing the metal to metal, that you're going to be replacing a rotor or a drum, which we don't have drums anymore, thank goodness. They're
right.
All disc brakes.
Yeah, but that's a great point to the people out there listening. If you take your car in and if you're pressing your brake pedal and you're hearing a screeching sound of metal on metal, and it's been doing it for a while, you haven't taken it in straight away like you should have, then if the mechanic says you got to replace your rotors, well, guess what? I bet they're right. And if you look at the rotors, you can probably see a little groove in them, and you'll know that they need to either be replaced or resurfaced. So be a little aware that those are some of the things that are a giveaway as to whether somebody's doing the right job for you or not.
Hey, I wanted to ask you one question real quick, James.
You bet.
How do you feel about taking your car to the dealer for repairs? Yeah,
I've done that, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it if you can afford to do it. I think people just have to know that you're paying a premium for it. I had a vehicle that I did take specifically to a dealership because I just had it in my mind like, okay, these people work on this brand all the time, so they should be able to do a better job. And I was on occasion dissatisfied with the service, and so it didn't prove out to me that the people who were doing that work were necessarily always as knowledgeable about the brand as they should have been. And so to me, there's kind of two disclaimers there. Either the junior people weren't getting enough oversight, or they were just hiring the wrong people. And then on top of that, you're paying a premium for sure. When I use my local mechanic, and he's not inexpensive. He's a pretty expensive mechanic for a local mechanic. But I know he's always going to stand behind his work and always does a good job for me. So that's my my thought on dealerships. So what's your opinion on those?
I think that's exactly right. Both sides are true, though. You may get a mechanic at a dealership along with a service department, a team that does a really good job, and they're worth the extra money. In my neighborhood, as a State Farm agent, a lot of my clients are somewhat affluent, and they kind of demand that their vehicle be serviced at the dealership. So after a claim, we certainly do that. We let them get their service at a dealership. And sometimes that works really well. But like you said, a dealer and a service team at a dealership, they're always going to be more expensive because they have a lot more overhead. And that doesn't necessarily guarantee that they're going to provide a value for that additional cost.
Yep, absolutely right. Well, hey, Jim, listen, we've gone over a bit from what I asked you time-wise for, and I want to be respectful of your time. I know you have a lot going on, being the Renaissance man that you are. So I guess the last thing I want to ask here is, can you tell me where you would want people to reach out to you, and if they've got something to say to you about this episode and they want to thank you for being on or something like that, where could they reach you?
They can reach me at thesocialbusinessauthority.com. That's probably the easiest way to reach me. But at Jim Munchbach, Twitter is, the instant way to reach me. At Jim Munchbach. And my last name has an H, not a K. And so I would love to hear your tweets and see that you're listening to James' show. And I will tweet you back as soon as I get off my motorcycle and to the end of my journey.
That sounds great. Well, Jim, I really appreciate you being on, and it's an honor to know you, and I look forward to seeing you at the next event. I'm assuming you'll be up here for the podcast movement.
You're in Dallas. That's right. I forgot.
You bet.
I'm going to be in Dallas Saturday. I'm picking up my Goldwing, and I'm going to meet Philip Taylor. We're going to do a little quick meetup, and nice. I'll text you and tell you where we end up being in case you're available.
Well, I would love to be there, but I can already tell you I'm at a Dave Ramsey conference this Saturday.
Nice.
He's got the SMART conference on Saturday, and I'm going to be in there soaking up some education.
Very cool. Now, yes, I'm going to be at the podcast movement in Dallas. That's August 18th?
16th and 17th, I believe.
16th? Okay, great. So if anybody wants to follow the hashtag podcast workshop, I'll be doing a little workshop there. I'm really excited about that.
Nice.
And I appreciate, James, getting to be on your show.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. And with that, I would say thank you so much for listening, and I hope you all have a great day. Hello and welcome back. This is James Kinson, the Cash Car Convert here, getting ready to close out the show. And I wanted to finish with a few thoughts. First of all, it seems like when Jim and I get together, my longest episodes are done. And I enjoy talking to Jim. He's a real personable guy, easy to speak to. So it's easy to let some things run long. But that's not the only reason that this episode ran long. The reason it ran long is because Jim has accomplished so much in his life. And I thought it was so important to bring that out on the episode. And so no matter where you are in your life, I wanted you to be able to look into Jim's life and see a potential point where you could see yourself, and you could see yourself going from one thing to another, and that if you're doing a job today, it's not the job you have to have for the rest of your life. You can make adjustments and plans and move forward and really change your life in a meaningful way. And I thought that was a really important thing, and I didn't want to shorten the time frame of that discussion. So I thought that was really important. And the interactions he has with his students and how he's trying to shape and mold them, and how, sometimes he has to give them tough love because, one thing I'll tell you as a listener to this show, same thing that Jim tells his students is true for you. Nobody's going to come riding in on a white horse and save you from your situation and create the life for you that you want. The only person that's going to do that is you. And so, giving those students tough love early teaches them that lesson that they have to count on themselves first and foremost. That's an invaluable lesson that I'm sure that they will benefit from for all the years that they have left in their life. The other thing I just want to quickly touch on is when I was doing my intro for Jim, I said he was dabbling in a lot of things, and that's not really fair. Jim has done excellent work with all the things that he's done. And I didn't mean to show any disrespect to all the things that he's accomplished, because I'm definitely in awe of all those things, and some of those things I hope to accomplish myself, and so I want to pay the proper respect to that. So really the reason for the episode was to bring somebody on who was a master mechanic, to have them talk about their experiences as a mechanic, and what my listeners might be able to take away from that, and how they can make better choices about their mechanics in the future. And I think there was a lot of good information provided here. I mean, I think the number one thing that I took away from it about finding a good mechanic is, use word of mouth. Talk to your friends and your family and find out if they have somebody that they just are in love with as a mechanic, or if there's somebody that they say definitely avoid, and take that to heart. And maybe do some online research to back that up as well. Maybe, check out a Yelp or an Angie's List or a Craigslist or something like that to validate the friends and family comments. And certainly if you don't have friends and family around, check with, people you work with, just the people that are in your life in general, and use them as a starting point for discussions about where to find a good mechanic. And then I think the discussion around specialty shops and general mechanics and dealerships, I think all of that is valuable as well. My personal take is find a good local mechanic in your area, whether it's a chain or truly somebody who owns just a shop or two, and create a relationship with them. And again, be proactive, taking your vehicle in before it needs service, just to make sure that there's not problems coming. The biggest thing I hear people say about buying an inexpensive used car is that they're afraid that they'll get stranded somewhere. Well, if you're taking your car in and having it checked out regularly, that will be a lot less likely to happen. Certainly anybody driving any kind of car can be stranded at any point in time. But the fact is, if you're doing the proper maintenance and you're working with your mechanic and getting all the right maintenance done, that'll be a lot less likely to happen. So I'll wrap up this episode with that. And just a reminder that, I really love what I'm doing here. And I know from feedback I've gotten from some of my listeners that I'm impacting some people, that I'm changing some lives. And I'd really like the opportunity to do that for more people. So I'd really appreciate it if you could go out to iTunes. And if you haven't already done it, please subscribe to the Cash Car Convert. And once you've done that, or if you've already done that, please go out and leave a rating and review. That really helps me get noticed in iTunes, helps bring me to more eyes and more ears. So I'd like the opportunity to have a few more listeners and to be able to touch a few more people's lives. With that, I really appreciate you, every listener. I'm so in awe of, like I said, the feedback I've gotten from the listeners, and I really appreciate each and every one of you. So thank you for listening. I hope you have a really, really great day and great week. Thank you.